This week in wrestling history. 11 years ago this week, on February 11th, 2010, it was on this date during a WWE investors call that Vince McMahon unexpectedly announced the death of Survivor Series, which the previous year had dropped from 191,000 pay-per-view buys in North America the year before to 136,000 pay-per-view buys. We think that Survivor Series is obsolete as far as that title is concerned. It was something that worked many, many years ago in terms of a creative standpoint, various teams competing. Survivor Series many years ago was one of the original 4 pay-per-views, but it has outlasted its usage, and it is one of the things in terms of rebranding this year and going forward that will be rebranded. No longer will we have that title. You've heard the expression used before. When it comes to WWE, plans change. Well, plans changed. And by June, Vince McMahon had reversed his decision after WrestleMania 26 that year saw a similar drop in pay-per-view buys. And with both of those shows, Survivor Series the previous year and WrestleMania that year, coming the day after a UFC pay-per-view, they realized that maybe the name isn't really the problem after all. And Survivor Series got a reprieve, and it has continued to live on as it has since 1987. A decade ago, you believe it, a decade ago, this week on Valentine's Day 2011, The Rock returned to WWE after a 7-year absence, appearing on Monday Night Raw as the surprise host of that year's WrestleMania, which served as the kickoff to a 3-year program with John Cena, which led to back-to-back WrestleMania main events each of the next 2 years. 9 years ago this week, on February 12th, 2012, at TNA's Against All Odds pay-per-view, the opening match between Jesse Sorensen and Zema Ion, now Joaquin Wilde of Legado del Fantasma on NXT, to crown a number 1 contender for the X Division Championship, ended with an unplanned countout win for Ion after he landed straight down on top of Sorensen's head outside the ring on a moonsault. More specifically, his knee connected with Sorensen's skull. Sorensen instantly collapsed to the ground. Referee Bryan rushed over to check on him and told him, got to get back in the ring. And when he didn't, he told him, if you don't get back in the ring, I'm going to count you out. And Sorensen, who was still conscious at least, had to tell Hebner, I can't move, I'm paralyzed. He had no feeling from the waist. I think he had very minimal feeling from the waist up, but he had no feeling from, I don't know if it was the chest down or the waist down, because he was having issues even with his hands and stuff. So he was pretty much paralyzed. Most of his body was paralyzed. He suffered a C1 vertebrae fracture with spinal cord edema, which is an injury that should have killed him and would have killed most people. He was in the very, very, very small percentile of people who actually survived the injury, or at least survived and did not suffer even more damage, and eventually actually got back in the ring and is leading, by all accounts, a normal life and walking again. He's a miracle in that respect. He was very, very, as unlucky as he was very, very lucky. And it reminds me of the Tyson Kidd injury, where he was in the 5%, I think they said, of people who actually survive a spinal cord injury like the one that he suffered. It was a matter of inches that saved his life in the case of Sorensen. Sorensen did promos later on about how he hoped that Zema Ion would go on to win the X Division title because he would be ready and happy to challenge him for the championship. But he never did. He never did return. TNA gave him a job instead as a production assistant, and despite promises, he claims, from Dixie Carter to he and his mother that, quote, as long as I have this company, you'll always have a job, they did eventually release him. He did an interview years ago with High Spots and said that his mother was at the hospital after it happened. She was freaking out about, everything. Obviously, she just saw her son. She watched it happen on pay-per-view. And they were, figuring, okay, he's just selling an injury or whatever. And then to find out, no, your son is being rushed to the hospital. And I don't know what they told her or what they didn't tell her, but then to find out your son is seriously injured. He's paralyzed. He may never walk again. He may not survive. They told him he may not survive the night. That's how touch and go it was that first 24 to 36 hours. So his mother was freaking out anyway. But his mother, he says, was really freaking out as well about the bills and the cost of all of this and the medical bills. You know, he was only 22 years old at the time. He was still on his mother's medical insurance. And the medical insurance was shit. And it maxed out, I think, it was capped, I think, maybe at $10,000 worth of coverage. His treatment cost a lot more than $10,000. Look, my knee surgery, okay, a few years ago, which wasn't anywhere close to as serious or as involved as his injury here, that cost $28,000. And this kid and his mom had to pay for their own MRIs and CAT scans and rehab and everything. The only way his mother was able to get rid of all the bills that were piling up, he said, was to file for personal bankruptcy. Now, back in the day, Dixie Carter would do these Ask Dixie hashtags. Remember Ask Dixie? We're going old school now. Old days of the sound off here. Dixie would do Ask Dixie on Twitter and take questions from fans. And after they fired Sorensen, she did one of these Ask Dixie deals. I don't have any fucking idea why she thought that would be a good idea, because they got a lot of backlash when they let him go. So she was doing Ask Dixie, and she was getting raked over the coals, as you would expect. Again, how stupid can you be to expect that people are going to ask you about anything other than this guy that got injured on your watch, that supposedly you promised a job for life to, and then you fired him? So she was getting a lot of heat. And what happened is, according to Sorensen, Dixie called him. This is after they fired him now. She called him and allegedly asked if they could release a joint statement together, saying that the release was 100% amicable and that he asked for it. He asked to be let go so that he could go ahead and pursue other interests, which was not true. And he flat out told her no, and good for him, standing up for himself. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. Of course I'm not going to do that. He said his mother was furious at Dixie for even asking such a thing. But I do love the story he also tells, because Kurt Angle visited him in the hospital. We know that. Kurt admitted Kurt was in TNA at the time, and he went and visited him and told everybody, oh, he's doing okay, he's going to be fine, blah, blah, blah. So, as Sorensen tells it, when Kurt came to visit him, and this is during a time where he was laid up in the hospital feeling sorry for himself, he was in a lot of pain, wasn't really getting up out of bed. Who should come bursting into his room but Kurt Angle? Unannounced. Angle shows up and he starts yelling at him and telling him to get up, stop feeling sorry for yourself, get on with your life. I just picture, Kurt Angle bursting through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man. But you know what? After that, Sorensen says he managed to walk down the hallway to make it to the bathroom on his own power. Forget cameo. Kurt Angle can make a killing by offering to randomly burst into people's hospital rooms and motivate them to get their ass out of bed. Just 2 days later, Dixie Carter posted the following announcement on her Facebook page. TNA and Vince Russo have mutually parted ways. As of this week, the separation is amicable and professional. We are glad for the opportunity to have worked together and wish each other nothing but good luck and success in the future. The separation would not be permanent, though. In July of 2014, so only 2 years later, Russo was outed as a creative consultant working for the company after he accidentally emailed notes for TNA announcers Mike Tenay and Taz to Mike Johnson of PW Insider. Instead, he got his mics mixed up. The belief is that his working with TNA was being kept secret, at least in part, because they didn't want Spike TV to find out. Now, Russo himself and others may have disputed that there was any kind of animus on the part of the network towards him, and they didn't even know who he was, or whatever his rebuttal is for that. But that was the belief, that at least in part, they felt they had to keep this a secret because if the network found out that Russo was back, they would not be happy about things at all. So they kept this very hush-hush. It was like a big clandestine thing, and nobody was supposed to know that Vince Russo was consulting until he sent that fucking email to Mike Johnson, who had already been suspecting that he might be back with the company, and he wasn't getting any answers, but then he got his answer all right. When he was accidentally either sent or CC'd or whatever on that email, he got his answer real quick about whether or not Vince Russo was back working for TNA. Just what a fucking mess this whole thing was. And by the way, on the whole Spike thing, so they find out now, right? Because now it's out in the open. And a week later, I think it was only 1 week later, is when Spike canceled Impact. What a fucking mess. Now, after Mike Johnson outed Russo, what was his response? Instead of just admitting that he made a mistake and sent an email to the wrong Mike, he instead dug his heels in and insisted that he did it on purpose to swerve him. That was his initial excuse. Bro, I did that on purpose, bro. I was trying to swerve you, bro. I knew what I was doing, bro. He was just trying to swerve Mike Johnson. And of course, to his credit, Mike Johnson knew that was bullshit. He called him out on his bullshit. He said it was not a swerve. And he threatened to publish the email for everybody to see for themselves, so that people would see that it was legit. A few hours later, Russo issues a statement on his website, striking a much more contrite tone, admitting that he sent the email accidentally and he was, coming clean, that he had been, in fact, secretly working for TNA. Would have saved himself a lot of trouble if he would have just been honest from the beginning. 6 years ago, on February 8th, 2015, Lucha Underground taped an episode for its first season from the Temple in Boyle Heights. Episode 24, for anybody who wants to go back. It aired on April 22nd, because they would tape these months in advance before they would finally air on TV. And I think they had everybody who was in attendance at the taping sign confidentiality agreements, so spoilers didn't leak. It was an episode titled Trios Champions that saw the crowning of the first ever Lucha Underground Trios Champions, with Son of Havoc, Angelico, and Ivelisse defeating Big Rick, Killshot, and the Mac. Before Dario Cueto then came out and informed them that, in fact, they have not yet won. They have to beat one final team in order to become champions, and that was the Crew, which was the team of Cortez Castro, Mr. Cisco, and Bale. The same Bale who later on in the series had his face eaten off by Matanza, Dario Cueto's monster brother. I'm telling you, man, if you never got into Lucha Underground, you really missed out. You gotta go back. You can watch all the seasons, all the episodes. They're on, I think, a few different services. They're probably on, you'll probably get them off Apple, but I think they're on Tubi TV, and they're in a few different places. I encourage you, especially those first couple of seasons, to give it a shot. But this was the match. This final match before they crowned new Trios champions. This was the match that featured one of the most insane spots, insane dives that I've ever seen, which had Angelico jumping off of the balcony that they had inside the temple. So there was you got to picture this place. It was a very intimate establishment. I love the look and the feel of the temple. It was basically like an abandoned warehouse that they turned into this little arena. And, there was a point at the top. It wasn't that high. I mean, it was high enough, but you can't picture, Madison Square Garden or anything like that. But at the top, there was just an area where there was a little platform. I don't even remember how he got up there. But Angelico was laying up there. He'd been taken out. And down below, his partners were in real trouble. And it's like he's never going to make it back down in time to rescue his opponents. But Angelico had a reputation for doing crazy dives and crazy shit. And so what he did was he built up a head of steam and he took off and he flew through the air. He flew gracefully through the air all the way down onto the heels and wiped them out down below. A spot so crazy that Vampiro leaped up out of his seat and threw down his headset and he started running back and forth. He didn't know what to do with himself. And Son of Havoc, Angelico, and Ivelisse would become the first ever Lucha Underground Trios champions. I really do miss that show. Just talking about it just now really hit me. I really do miss Lucha Underground. I wish they would have at least had the chance to wrap things up in the wrap up all the stories and everything the correct way. And they never did. It's just going to forever be this loose thread just hanging there that never got the resolution it deserved. 5 years ago this week, on February 8th, 2016, Daniel Bryan took to Twitter to announce his retirement from the ring, saying, "Due to medical reasons effective immediately, I am announcing my retirement. Tonight on Raw, I will have a chance to elaborate." Bryan was out for much of 2014 after winning the WWE title at WrestleMania. He had a neck issue. He came back in December, and he entered himself into the Royal Rumble match, which, as I have said before, hindsight now looking back at what they did and what happened, that was a huge misfire on their part. That was a huge mistake. If he was not going to win the Royal Rumble, he wasn't even in the Royal Rumble in 2014, but he was in the match in 2015 when he came back. And if he wasn't going to win, because people still had this hunger to see Daniel Bryan win the Royal Rumble and have this great comeback story from injury and go to WrestleMania, and if that wasn't the plan, and they were trying so hard at that time at the beginning of 2015 to get Roman Reigns over as the next big babyface, but people still were into Bryan, putting him in that match was the worst thing they could have done. It really was the worst thing they could have done, because what it also did was, it didn't just piss off the fans. What it did was, it completely fucked over Roman Reigns. Through no fault of his own. He did nothing wrong. But the company screwed him over. But Bryan went on to win the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania 31. A month later, he had to forfeit the championship due to concussion issues, and he had not wrestled the match since. So now we're in 2016, and now comes the retirement announcement. He's already been out of the ring for almost a year, and now it's been made official. He will not be cleared, and he will not be allowed back, at least not in WWE, he will not be allowed back in the ring. And he was doing everything in his power to get cleared by WWE to come back. He saw so many doctors. He got cleared by them. He got cleared by a doctor at UCLA. He got cleared by the neurologist for the Arizona Cardinals of the NFL. He was doing hyperbaric chamber treatment to help his brain, which had been proven to be effective, I think, in some case. He was trying everything he could, and he got clearances from certain doctors, but he didn't get clearance from the one doctor that he needed clearance from, which was the WWE doctor. He refused to clear him, and his opinion was the only one that mattered. So Vince McMahon, when he got the news from the doctor, he called up Bryan himself, and he gave him the bad news. And he said, look, Raw's going to be in Washington State. Bryan's from Aberdeen. They were going to be in Seattle for Raw that Monday night. I want you to come to Washington. I want you to come to Raw. And I want to give you a microphone and let you go out there, and you can have a segment to say whatever it is that you want to say. You go out there, you make the announcement, you address the crowd. And that's what he did. And Bryan admitted that within his first 5 months of training to become a pro wrestler, he had suffered 3 concussions. So imagine how many more concussions he must have suffered over the course of the next, whatever it was, 15, 16 years of his career. And recent tests had shown, there was one test that came back that showed some kind of lesion on his brain. So the speech he gave is up there with the Edge retirement speech on Raw as 2 of the most difficult segments to watch in Raw history. I mean, most Raw segments these days are difficult to watch. But on a serious note, these were difficult in a whole different kind of way. And now, 5 years later, Bryan and Edge are back in the ring. Funny enough, it was only when Bryan was nearing the end of his contract and he was openly in interviews, openly talking about wanting to go and wrestle in other places. I know he still wants to go to Mexico and have, I think, a hair match. What was it, with Blue Demon or I forgot exactly who it was. But he was talking openly about doing all of these things. And yeah, I'm not going to stop wrestling. You know, he had been away from it for so long, but he still wanted to do it. So he was talking very openly about that and coming to the end of his contract. And all of a sudden, WWE became receptive to the possibility of him wrestling again. Same with Edge. Edge got an offer from Tony Khan to come work for AEW. He was going to be like an agent or a coach or something, but also have a few matches. It might be similar to the deal that Sting got, right? Where Sting comes in. Sting's not going to be wrestling all the time, but he'll have a few special matches throughout the year. That was the offer he got from AEW, and I'm sure it was a good money offer too. But out of loyalty and respect to Vince McMahon, he felt he had to go to Vince and just tell him, look, I got this offer. I just want you to know, I got this offer and I'm considering it, or I'm going to consider it, unless you have, something that you might want to offer me. And all of a sudden, he got, after telling Vince McMahon this, Vince McMahon tells him, hey, let's talk. And after 9 years away, Edge is back in the ring when he was told, we're never going to clear you again because you have spinal stenosis and it's just too risky to let you back in the ring. Only when Edge said, hey, I have an offer to go wrestle somewhere else. Hey, let's talk. Hey, there might be a way. There might be a way to get you back in the ring in a safe way. Realistically, there is no safe way. If you're going to wrestle, unless it's like a one-off and every precaution in the world, you don't take any bumps and stuff, like, realistically, there is no way. Edge is back, and he's taking bumps. He spent an hour in the Royal Rumble a few weeks ago. He's getting slammed. Edge is back. He's wrestling the same way he wrestled 9-10 years ago. There is no safe way to wrestle. Realistically, you're still at risk every time you get in the ring, but obviously something changed. And now Edge is back in the ring. It's interesting how that works, is all I'm saying. Very interesting how that works. Bryan and Edge also happen to be working for the creative teams now for Raw and SmackDown, respectively. So they're pretty well embedded in the company right now. It was a very nice segment, though. It ended in a very different way. It ended with Titus O'Neil in the final shot of the live broadcast, grabbing Vince McMahon's arm as they were, because the roster had gathered on stage to applaud Bryan and give him a standing ovation. So they were all as Bryan came to the back, he passed everybody. And as the McMahons were then going to return to the back, Titus, in a very playful way, grabbed Vince McMahon's arm. And it wasn't trying to be malicious or anything like that, but it was enough to earn him a 60-day suspension, which at first was going to be 90 days. Or I think they may have actually announced it as 90 days, and it got knocked down to 60 because there was so much backlash to it. But Vince McMahon considered firing him first. So he went from, we're going to fire this guy, to we're going to suspend him for 90 days, and eventually it became a 60-day suspension instead. And look, I get it. You need to read the room, as they say, in certain situations, and that was not really the time nor the place. Emotions were running high. One of the top stars in the company, who everybody loved, just made the most difficult announcement of his life and announced that he was prematurely being forced into an early retirement. And I'm sure, look, it was tough for Vince McMahon too. I'm sure he probably had tears in his eyes, and he was also emotional for Bryan. And we've heard plenty of stories of Vince McMahon grabbing other guys, trying to, single leg them and take them down on airplanes and stuff and being obnoxious. But this was not the time nor the place for that. So I understand why he would have been upset. I get that. I'm sure Vince McMahon was not in the mood to be playful, but it was still excessive. Firing the guy would have been fucking ridiculous, but even the 60-day suspension was excessive. Batista was furious. Batista and Titus are best friends. I mean, Batista and Titus are thick as thieves. Batista was absolutely just fuming over this whole situation. And he told Titus, I think he might have even tweeted it out, he told him, you got to ask for your release. He wanted him to ask for his release. That's how upset he was at how his friend was being treated. And finally, this one's a little bit out of order, but I thought we would end with this because, tonight being NXT TakeOver Vengeance Day and all, it was 6 years ago this week, on February 11th, 2015, at NXT TakeOver Rival, only the fourth takeover they ever did, that we had two major title changes. Sasha Banks won her first and only NXT Women's Championship, defeating Charlotte Flair, Bayley, and Becky Lynch in an excellent fatal four-way match. And Kevin Owens, just 2 months after making his NXT debut, and 2 months after Sami Zayn beat Adrian Neville to become NXT champion. And Owens turned on Sami, his very first night in the company on that show. Here, Owens beat Zayn by ref stoppage to become the NXT champion. He was repeatedly powerbombing him. He powerbombed him 4 times. He was going for a 5th. And the trainers and doctors were outside. The referee didn't know what to do. And finally, the referee just kind of dove in the way that like a UFC referee would dive in when he's ready to call for a stoppage. And the fans were booing the finish, and they didn't know what to make of it. I don't think they realized that they had just witnessed a title change until the referee grabbed the belt and physically went to hand it to Kevin Owens, and then they got this big pop. But people couldn't believe what they had seen. And Kevin Owens was the new NXT champion and would go on to debut on the main roster. I guess it was only a few months later. Started feuding with John Cena. He was still NXT champion at that time.